Much of what you know as Christianity and Islam today has little to do with the faiths themselves and more to do with the US Central Intelligence Agency. Some of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century made references to the large-scale weaponization of religion by colonial powers in post-colonial societies. For example, in his book, Neo-Colonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism, Kwame Nkrumah wrote about the riptide of religious sects that followed after independence from colonial rule. Frantz Fanon, in his book, The Wretched of the Earth, described how religious tensions were inflamed and encouraged by colonial forces in the emerging post-colonial environment. But beyond these passing references to the external manipulation of religion in the global south, how was this massive weaponization of religion actually done? Here's where the CIA comes in. Between the 1960s and the 1980s, the global south became the site of a war of religious ideas. Some of these ideas were created to maintain and perpetuate the existing capitalist economic and political hegemony, while others emerged to counter the hegemony or to spark local political change. Under the guise of countering communism, the CIA infiltrated Christian movements all over the global south with the mission of steering Christian doctrines away from so-called liberation theology. Originating in the Catholic Church of Latin America, liberation theology was a set of teachings that encouraged people to stand up to corrupt governments and take collective actions to better their lives. Because it was rooted in Catholic social justice concerns and it borrowed from Marxist social analysis to understand and respond to inequality, US state forces labeled it communist, which of course made it a threat to be snuffed out. Over the course of several years, the CIA, by its own admission, pumped millions of dollars into funding pro-capitalist Christian movements all over the global south as part of its anti-communist Cold War effort. It succeeded in replacing liberation theology with so-called prosperity gospel as the most popular face of Christianity in the global south. This new doctrine erased any need for collectivism, instead encouraging people to see their Christian faith and salvation as individualistic issues to be measured using specific individual outcomes, such as economic blessings. You could now measure the extent of your divine approval using the metrics of capitalism. So out went, love thy brother as thyself, and in came, sow a seed of $50 to reap a blessing of $5,000.
As a student, I would just give what I had left. I said, God, this guy I'm paying tuition anyhow, so I might as well give it. And I would go in front of chapel, we'd have offering time, we'd give it. And friends, 2 days later, from nowhere, envelope appears in my mailbox with twice as much as I need for tuition, with no name on it.
It was the perfect capitalist ruse because it convinced people to stop thinking of progress as a shared national or collective issue, but rather as an individual responsibility, which meant they did not need to organize into pressure groups, political movements, trade unions, student unions, or any other collectivist entities that could be considered leftist or communist. And it succeeded wildly, turning many of the world's poorest people in Africa, Latin America, Asia, and the Caribbean into rabid, money-obsessed capitalists without capital, who had lost the ability to see economic deprivation and its consequences as a political problem. In the decades since the 1980s, prosperity gospel has established itself across the global south, primarily through megachurches whose pastors were almost invariably trained, mentored, or connected in some form to the evangelical movements in the southern United States. But the US empire did not attack Christianity alone. Early on in the Cold War, with the rise of figures such as Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser and Libya's Muammar Gaddafi, the US realized the potential of weaponizing Islam to serve as a bulwark against Arab nationalism and Islam's own egalitarian doctrine. It collaborated with Saudi Arabia to create organizations such as the Muslim World League, which funded the global spread of Wahhabism, a niche sect of Islam that exploded into popularity in the 1970s and swept across the Muslim world. This form of Islam preached individual virtue, total submission to authority, which made it a useful political tool for US-aligned capitalist monarchies in the Gulf region and a vector for spreading individualism across the Islamic world. This form of Islam would later go on to be associated with Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and other violent extremist groups. By its own admission, the CIA also covertly trained and funded the Afghan Mujahideen, which later morphed into Al-Qaeda in the Soviet-Afghan War of the 1980s. Ultimately, it supported and continues to support the very Islamist groups that have contributed toward building an atmosphere of violence in the Middle East, using a strategy that journalist Matt Domonthal has described as management of savagery. For the people of the global south, religion has long served as a source of succor in an uncertain and unstable world. While some continue to seek escape from today's complex realities by giving their time and money to CIA-affiliated megachurches in search of personal prosperity, or resorting to senseless violence at the instigation of CIA-funded religious organizations, we should all be aware that, as far as the empire is concerned, nothing is sacred and nothing is off limits. War, to the empire, is not a shooting event at a single point in time. It is a permanent and ongoing state of affairs in which anything at all can and will be weaponized, including the beliefs and practices we hold closest.